You walk into a forest after rain. Mushrooms have pushed through the leaf litter overnight, small pale shapes lifting out of what looks like dead ground. The trunks are still, the air feels calm, and somewhere above you, one tree is being eaten. A caterpillar, a beetle, some small mouth taking small bites from a leaf edge. To us, that looks like a private event, one organism having a bad day. But before the damage spreads, nearby trees may already be changing. Their chemistry shifts. Defensive compounds begin to rise, resources move, tissues that have not been touched start preparing for trouble. From the surface, nothing dramatic happens. No sound, no visible panic. Which is exactly why this world is so easy to misread. We are built to notice animal life. Eyes, voices, sudden motion, obvious intention. A deer bolts, and our attention locks on. A tree changes its chemistry by a fraction, or redirects carbon through its roots, and our brains file it under nothing happened. So, we call a forest silent, when what we really mean is that we do not recognize the language. And under a few inches of soil, there is a conversation happening that is older than forests as we know them. The simple story most of us inherit is reasonable. Trees compete for light, fungi decompose things. Mushrooms appear for a few days, look mysterious, then collapse. Plants make sugars with sunlight. Fungi live off whatever they can get. Separate categories, separate lives. But the real picture is less like a row of strangers and more like a constantly negotiated web. And before we go further, it helps to clean up one word that makes people either excited or skeptical. Communication. When scientists use that word, they are not sneaking poetry into biology. They mean one organism produces a signal, and that signal changes what another organism does. By that definition, forests communicate all the time. Not with words, not with human thought, but with chemistry, electricity, timing, pressure, and exchange. What fungi and trees say to each other underground is often some version of this. Here is carbon, here is nitrogen, water is scarce. Trouble is near. This root is worth feeding. This tissue should get ready. The first mistake is to think the mushroom is the fungus. Most of the organism is hidden. What you see above ground is usually the fruiting body, the reproductive flare. The real body is mostly underground. An immense network of microscopic threads called hyphae, woven through soil and around roots. When those fungal threads partner with plant roots, the relationship is called mycorrhiza. Botanists have known for over a century that most land plants form these relationships. Fossil and genetic evidence suggests partnerships like this helped early plants colonize land hundreds of millions of years ago. In a very literal sense, the green world we know may have been built with fungal help. Why would a tree make that deal? Because roots are powerful, but limited. Fungal threads are much finer. They move into tiny pores in the soil that roots alone cannot easily reach. They gather water. They pull in hard-to-get nutrients like phosphorus and forms of nitrogen. The tree, in return, shares carbon-rich sugars made through photosynthesis. It is a trade agreement written in metabolism. The fungus extends the tree's reach. The tree feeds the fungus's hunger. There are even different versions of this partnership. In many temperate forests, certain fungi wrap root tips in a kind of sheath and then radiate outward, almost like a second, more delicate root system. In many grasses and crops, other fungi actually enter root cells and build tiny branching exchange structures inside them. Different architecture, same principle. The plant is not alone in the soil, it is in a relationship, and that relationship becomes a pathway for both resources and signals. And already, that is enough to change how you see a forest. The soil is not background. It is infrastructure, but the story gets stranger when one fungus links more than one plant. Those links are called common mycorrhizal networks. In some forests, a single fungal individual can connect the roots of multiple trees and seedlings at once. Suddenly, what looked like isolated trunks standing side by side becomes something more like a neighborhood sharing hidden plumbing. This is where the work of forest ecologist Suzanne Simard, first at the Canadian Forest Service and later at the University of British Columbia, changed how many people imagined the woods. In landmark experiments, Simard and her colleagues used carbon isotopes to trace how carbon moved between paper birch and Douglas fir seedlings connected underground. They found that carbon could travel from one species to another, and that the direction and amount could shift with season and light. A shaded plant, or one under stress, could receive more. Older, well-connected trees often acted as hubs with many more links than the small seedlings around them. That does not mean trees are sitting underground, deciding to be kind in the human sense. It means something just as profound and much more testable. Resources move through living relationships. Stress changes those flows. Connection changes survival. And carbon is only part of the story. When a tree is wounded, it does not just sit there and take it. Damage triggers rapid electrical and chemical changes inside the plant. Hormones associated with defense surge. Genes linked to protective compounds switch on. Some of that warning can travel through the air as volatile chemicals released from leaves. That part is already well known. Trees can, in a sense, smell trouble nearby, but some warnings also appear to move below ground. In controlled experiments, researchers have grown plants so that air could not carry the message and roots could not touch directly, leaving a fungal network as the main route between them. When one plant was attacked, connected neighbors often changed their own defense state. They did not launch the full, expensive chemistry of a total emergency, at least not immediately. They primed. That word matters. Priming means getting ready faster, like lifting your head before the sound becomes a crash. It is cheaper than all-out defense, but it buys time. Studies on beans, tomatoes, and other plants have shown versions of this effect through mycorrhizal links. Disconnect the fungal bridge, and the response can weaken or disappear. Exactly what moves through that bridge is still an active area of research. In some cases, it may be chemical compounds themselves. In others, it may be hormone shifts, changes in nutrient flow, or responses by the fungus that then alter the plant. The network is not a clean wire, it is living tissue. That means the message can be transformed as it moves. The fungus is not just a cable, it is part of the event. If we translated that into human language, it would not sound like a sentence. It would sound more like a pulse of meaning. Prepare. This is the moment where the forest stops looking passive. Not because trees have little brains in their roots. They do not. Not because fungi are kindly couriers floating between friends. They are not. The underground world is not sentimental. It is strategic. Fungi are living organisms with interests of their own. A fungus benefits from keeping host plants alive, but it also negotiates with them, favors some partners over others, and responds to who is paying in carbon. Some plants can even exploit the system, taking more than they give. In real soil, roots leak chemicals, bacteria swarm, moisture shifts, and trees can also connect directly through root contact or grafts. So not every underground transfer belongs to fungi alone. This is one reason scientists still debate how much of the famous Wood Wide Web story is active signaling. How much is resource flow driven by gradients, and how much depends on species, season, and ecosystem. That nuance does not make the story weaker, it makes it real. Because the deepest truth is not that forests are secretly moral. It is that they are profoundly relational. Survival is not built from competition alone. It is built from exchange, from context, from systems that make one organism's condition relevant to another's. And this is where the emotional reframe happens. Most of us were taught, directly or indirectly, to see strength in nature as independence. The biggest tree wins. The weak one loses. The seedling lives or dies on its own merits. The mushroom is background scenery. But underground, the picture shifts. The towering tree may also be a hub, feeding fungi that feed roots, influencing moisture and nutrient access, changing what younger neighbors can reach. A shaded seedling may not be surviving only because it is tough enough. It may be surviving because it is not entirely alone. Simard used the phrase mother tree to describe older trees that function as major network centers in a forest, especially where seedlings establish near them. The phrase caught on because it feels human. It gives the forest a face. But even if we set the metaphor aside, the biology remains striking. Larger, older trees often have more root surface, more fungal partners, and more chances to influence what happens around them. In some studies, seedlings connected to these hub trees show better establishment or altered carbon dynamics, especially under shade or stress. Whether we describe that as care, buffering, or system-level redistribution, the effect matters. The next generation is growing inside a web it did not build. But depends on, that is a very different kind of intelligence than the one we usually celebrate. It is not centered in a skull. It is distributed. It emerges from sensing, feedback, memory-like effects, and flexible response. And yes, plants do show those things. Not neurons, but signaling. Not a brain, but integration. A tree can detect injury, drought, light direction, gravity, day length, nutrient availability, and chemical cues from neighbors. It can alter growth, chemistry, timing, and resource allocation in response. Fungi can assess nutrient patches, redirect growth, and change which roots they invest in. If you prefer a cautious phrase, call this biological information processing. If you want the emotional truth, call it hidden sophistication. Either way, what looked like stillness turns out to be decision under slow motion. Sometimes, that hidden support becomes visible in eerie ways. Foresters and researchers have occasionally found old stumps with no leaves, no crown, no obvious way to feed themselves, and yet living tissue persists at the edges. In some cases, root grafts between neighboring trees help explain it. In others, fungal connections may also be part of the story. However the carbon arrives, the image is unforgettable. What looks dead above ground may not be fully abandoned below. The forest has more ways to keep something going than we assume. That matters far beyond curiosity, because these networks are fragile. When forest soils are compacted, heavily disturbed, or stripped bare, the fine threads of fungal networks are damaged. When old trees are removed, the architecture of connection changes with them. When heat and drought intensify, both trees and their fungal partners come under stress, and partnerships that once buffered hard seasons can begin to fail. Replanting a forest is not just putting trunks back into the ground. A forest is also the invisible society in the soil. Fungi, bacteria, roots, decaying wood, moisture gradients, all the living context that makes a tree more than a standing stem. This is one reason simplified landscapes often feel poorer, even when they are green. A plantation can look like a forest from the road and still lack much of the underground complexity that makes natural forests resilient. Diverse fungal communities can help plants access nutrients, tolerate stress, and recover after damage. Lose that network richness, and the system may become less adaptable, less buffered, more brittle. There is also a warning inside the beauty. Underground connection does not only move help, it can also move cost. Some fungi become more parasitic under certain conditions. Some pathogens spread through root zones. A network can redistribute resources, but it can also redistribute vulnerability. That is the price of connection in every living system, including our own. To be linked is to be supported and exposed at the same time. Maybe that is why this story lands so deeply with people. It is not because we want trees to be tiny humans. It is because the pattern feels familiar. Health is rarely a solo achievement. Resilience is often collective. The organisms under our feet learned that long before we did. So what are fungi and trees saying to each other underground? They are saying, we're in the only language evolution ever promised. Here is a bargain. Here is a warning. Here is a route to water. Here is extra carbon if you can use it. Something nearby has changed. Prepare your chemistry. Hold on through shade. Invest here. Not forever, not out of kindness alone, but because life in a shared world is more successful when information and resources can move. The next time you see mushrooms pushing through leaf litter, remember that you are looking at the brief, above-ground flare of a much larger relationship. The next time you notice a seedling living in deep shade, or an old stump still damp and alive at the edges, or a stand of trees that somehow seems to move through drought and damage as more than separate trunks, remember that the visible forest is only half the forest. Beneath it is a living mesh of trade, warning, and delay, response, and memory-like change. What looks passive is often active. What looks random is often signaling. What looks insignificant is often foundational. And maybe that is the deepest lesson here. The natural world is not less intelligent because it is quiet. It is quieter than our habits of attention. If there is a forest moment you will never see the same way again after this, tell me in the comments. And if you want more science-backed stories that make ordinary plant life feel extraordinary without leaving the evidence behind, subscribe. There is a lot more happening in the green world than we were ever taught to notice.